Absolutely. There is a strange kind of man who becomes more difficult to love the more he understands. Not because he becomes cruel, not because he loses his emotions, and not because he stops caring. Something far more subtle happens. He begins to see. Absolutely. He sees the hesitation behind someone's words. He notices when affection changes. He recognizes emotional patterns before they fully appear. He remembers contradictions that everyone else has already forgotten. And eventually, absolutely, something inside him changes. He stops simply experiencing relationships and starts watching them. That sounds like wisdom. Sometimes it is, but there is a hidden danger. Absolutely. Because the moment you begin observing every emotion while you are experiencing it, you create a distance between yourself and the moment. You are no longer completely inside the experience. Part of you is standing outside of it, studying. Absolutely. And that is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because a man can understand love so deeply that he slowly loses his ability to surrender to it. Kierkegaard spent much of his philosophy examining precisely this tension between living and reflecting. Absolutely. And perhaps his darkest insight is this: a person can become so conscious of life that consciousness itself becomes a barrier to living. Think about the beginning of a relationship. Everything feels uncertain. Absolutely. You don't know what the other person is thinking. You don't know where it will go. You don't know whether tomorrow will bring closeness or distance. And strangely enough, that uncertainty creates energy. There is discovery, there is anticipation. Absolutely. There is mystery. You are not calculating every moment, you are simply living it. But then something changes. You become more observant. You start noticing patterns. You realize that every argument follows a familiar sequence. Absolutely. You notice when affection is being given and when it is being withdrawn. You begin predicting reactions. You can almost hear the next sentence before it is spoken. At first, this feels powerful. Absolutely. You believe you understand the person better than anyone else. But eventually, another possibility appears. Maybe you are no longer meeting the person. Maybe you are meeting your prediction of the person. And those are two very different things. Absolutely. The human mind loves patterns. Parse make uncertainty feel manageable. If someone behaves a certain way 5 times, your mind starts expecting the 6th. If they become distant after conflict, you expect distance. If they return after silence, absolutely, you expect them to return again soon. The relationship becomes a psychological map. And once the map becomes more important than the territory, you stop discovering, you start confirming. Absolute, one of the quietest ways. Emotional life becomes mechanical. You think you are becoming wiser, but you may simply be becoming less surprised. And surprise is not a weakness. Absolutely. Sometimes surprise is evidence that you are still encountering another human being rather than interacting with a theory. This is where Kierkegaard becomes especially relevant. He was deeply suspicious of a life dominated by reflection. Absolutely. Reflection can reveal truth, but reflection can also create endless distance from action. You can analyze a decision for so long that you never make it. You can think about love for so long that you never risk loving. Absolutely. You can study fear so carefully that you never become courageous. And you can examine your relationship so intensely that the relationship itself begins to feel like an experiment. Absolutely. The intelligent man often believes the solution to uncertainty is something feels wrong, so he asks why, leads to another why, then another. He analyzes the conversation, he remembers the tone, he reconstructs the timeline. Absolutely. He searches for the exact moment something changed, and eventually he has a complete explanation. Except one thing is missing: the relationship. Because while he was trying to understand what was happening, absolutely, he stopped participating in what was happening. This is the paradox. Sometimes understanding a moment too much destroys the moment. Imagine sitting across from someone you love. They laugh, you smile. For a few seconds, nothing needs to be explained. Absolutely. There is no psychological framework, no strategy, no interpretation, just two people sharing a moment. But the reflective mind can interrupt even that. Why did she laugh like that? Why did her tone change? Was she genuinely happy? Absolutely. Is she trying to hide something? Does this remind me of something she said last week? And suddenly the moment that could have been lived becomes something to be decoded. The mind has turned intimacy into information. And information is not intimacy. Absolutely. This does not mean intelligence is the enemy of love. It means intelligence without surrender can become one. There is a difference between seeing someone and constantly interpreting them. There is a difference between awareness and surveillance. Absolutely. There is a difference between emotional intelligence and emotional analysis. The first creates connection, the second can create pressure. Because imagine what it feels like to be around someone who notices everything. Your pauses are noticed. Absolutely. Your contradictions are noticed. Your mood changes are noticed. Your defensive reactions are noticed. Even the things you haven't fully understood about yourself are being understood by someone else. That can feel deeply attractive at first. Absolutely. To be understood is powerful, but eventually being understood can become uncomfortable because human beings don't always want to be completely transparent. Sometimes we want room to change our minds. Sometimes we want to be inconsistent. Absolutely. Sometimes we don't know why we feel something, and sometimes we need to experience an emotion before we explain it. A person who demands perfect emotional consistency can unintentionally create a prison because suddenly every emotion needs a reason. Absolutely. Every reaction needs an explanation. Every disagreement becomes evidence. Every silence becomes a signal. And love begins to feel like an interrogation without questions. This is where many highly reflective people misunderstand what is happening. Absolutely. They think, if I can understand this better, I can fix it. But not everything that becomes unclear needs to be solved. Some things need to be experienced. Some emotions need time. Some contradictions disappear on their own. Absolutely. Some conversations are not problems. They are simply moments between two imperfect human beings. And here is the uncomfortable part. The intelligent person often has difficulty accepting that, because accepting uncertainty feels like surrendering control. Absolutely. And the analytical mind hates surrender. It wants a conclusion, it wants a cause, it wants a pattern, it wants an answer. But human beings are not equations. People change. Feelings fluctuate, dantians evolve. Absolutely. Someone can love you and still become distant. Someone can miss you and still refuse to return. Someone can care about you and still be incapable of giving you what you need. Not every contradiction is a puzzle. Sometimes it is simply reality. Absolutely. And this is where maturity begins, not when you understand everything, but when you learn what does not need to be understood. There is another danger that comes with extreme awareness. The man begins to protect himself with knowledge. Absolutely. He tells himself he is simply being realistic, but underneath that realism can be fear. He has learned enough about relationships to know how they can hurt. He has watched attachment turn into dependency. He has seen promises disappear. Absolutely. He has seen people change. He has experienced disappointment, so he becomes careful, very careful. He doesn't rush. He doesn't reveal everything. He doesn't chase. He doesn't react. He maintains control. And from the outside, absolutely, this looks like strength. But there is a question he rarely asks. Am I calm because I am secure or because I am afraid to become vulnerable again? Those two things look almost identical from the outside, but internally they are worlds apart. Absolutely. Real emotional strength does not mean you never lose control. It means you can experience emotion without becoming its prisoner. A man who feels nothing is not necessarily strong. Absolutely. A man who feels deeply and still chooses his actions carefully may be far stronger. And this distinction matters because some intelligent men eventually confuse emotional detachment with emotional maturity. They stop chasing. Good, they stop begging. Absolutely. Good, they stop tolerating disrespect. Good. But then they go too far. They stop communicating. They stop revealing vulnerability. They stop allowing themselves to be surprised. They stop needing anyone. Absolutely. And eventually they build a life that cannot hurt them, but also cannot deeply touch them. That is not freedom. That is a fortress, and a fortress protects you from enemies, but it also keeps everyone else outside. Absolutely. This is why the journey of the reflective man cannot end with detachment. It has to continue toward participation. You must learn to see without constantly judging, to understand without constantly dissecting. Absolutely. To remain aware without becoming emotionally absent, to love without losing yourself, and to remain yourself without turning love into a negotiation for control. This is much harder than simply becoming cold. Anyone can become cold. Absolutely. It requires very little wisdom. You get hurt. You withdraw. You build walls. You call the walls boundaries. And eventually, you convince yourself that you have become stronger. But sometimes you haven't become stronger. Absolutely. You've simply become harder to reach. There is a reason mystery has always played such an important role in human attraction. Mystery creates space. Space allows imagination. Imagination creates possibility. And possibility keeps experience alive. Absolutely. When everything is explained, everything becomes predictable. And predictability can create comfort. But comfort is not always the same thing as aliveness. The goal is not to remain ignorant. The goal is to avoid turning knowledge into control. Absolutely. A man can know someone deeply and still allow them to surprise him. He can understand emotional patterns and still treat the individual moment as new. He can recognize manipulation without becoming suspicious of everyone. Absolutely. He can understand human weakness without becoming cynical about humanity. That is a higher form of intelligence because the lowest form of intelligence says, I understand people, therefore I can predict them. A deeper intelligence says, absolutely. I understand people enough to know that they cannot be completely predicted. That difference changes everything. And perhaps this is where the intelligent man's story finally turns. Absolutely. He begins to realize that his greatest problem was never that he understood too much. It was that he believed understanding should protect him from uncertainty. But uncertainty is not an error in life. It is part of life. Absolutely. You cannot eliminate the possibility of heartbreak without also eliminating some possibility of deep connection. You cannot guarantee that someone will stay. You cannot guarantee that someone will understand you. Absolutely. You cannot guarantee that your love will be returned in exactly the form you imagined. And no amount of intelligence can change that. The mind wants certainty. Life offers choices. Absolutely. The mind wants control. Love requires risk. And this is why the most mature man eventually stops asking, how can I make sure this doesn't hurt me? He begins asking, who do I want to be if it does? That is a completely different question. Absolutely. The first question is about control. The second is about character. And character is where genuine strength begins. Maybe the goal was never to become the man who cannot be hurt. Absolutely. Maybe the goal was to become the man who can be hurt without becoming bitter. The man who can lose without becoming desperate. The man who can love without becoming dependent. The man who can walk away without needing revenge. Absolutely. The man who can stay without losing himself. That man does not need to analyze every emotional movement. He watches, he listens, he responds, but he remains inside the experience. He does not stand above his own life like a spectator. Absolutely. And perhaps that is the lesson the reflective man eventually has to learn. Awareness should be a window, not a prison. If your intelligence allows you to see reality more clearly, use it. Absolutely. But don't let that clarity convince you that every moment must be explained. If you recognize patterns, learn from them. But don't assume every person is simply another repetition of your past. If you understand psychology, use it to create compassion. Absolutely. Not suspicion. If you understand human weakness, use that knowledge to become less judgmental, not more cynical. And if you understand how easily relationships can disappear, then perhaps you should become more present, not less. Because one day, absolutely, the conversation you are analyzing will be the conversation you wish you could have again. One day, the person whose behavior you were trying to decode may simply be gone. And then all your theories will remain, the patterns, the explanations. Absolutely. The reasons, the psychological conclusions. But the moment itself will be gone. That is the tragedy of excessive reflection. You can become so busy understanding the meaning of life that you forget to live the life giving the meaning. Absolutely. So if you are the kind of man who thinks deeply, notices everything, and rarely takes emotions at face value, don't destroy that part of yourself. You don't need less intelligence. You need more presence. You don't need to become naive. Absolutely. You need to become capable of uncertainty. You don't need to stop seeing. You need to stop believing that everything you see must immediately become a conclusion. Because there is a difference between wisdom and overthinking. Absolutely. Wisdom knows when to look deeper. Overthinking refuses to stop looking. And perhaps the strongest man is not the one who understands everyone. It is the one who understands enough, absolutely, and still knows when to simply sit beside another human being without needing to explain the moment. Because sometimes love doesn't need another analysis. Sometimes it needs your presence. Absolutely. Sometimes the deepest form of intelligence is knowing when to put the mind down and finally live. And maybe that is the final paradox. The man who once believed that understanding would save him, absolutely, eventually discovers that acceptance was what he was searching for, not acceptance of weakness. Acceptance of uncertainty. Acceptance that people are complicated. Acceptance that emotions are unstable. Acceptance that love cannot be controlled. Absolutely. Acceptance that life will never give you complete information before asking you to make a decision. And once he accepts that changes, he becomes quieter, not empty, not cold, not detached, just less desperate for certainty. Absolutely. He no longer needs to predict every ending. He can enjoy the beginning. He can experience the present. He can love without demanding a guarantee. And that is perhaps the most dangerous kind of calm. Absolutely. Because now his peace is no longer dependent on another person's behavior. He can stay when staying is right. He can leave when leaving is necessary. And either way, he does not lose himself. That is not the death of intelligence. Absolutely. It is intelligence finally becoming wisdom. So remember this, seeing more does not automatically make you wiser. Sometimes wisdom is knowing what to do with what you see. Sometimes strength is refusing to turn every feeling into a theory. Absolutely. Sometimes love means allowing another person to remain partly unknown. And sometimes the greatest freedom is accepting that you will never understand everything and choosing to live anyway, because life was never meant to be completely solved. Absolutely. It was meant to be experienced. And perhaps the man who finally understands this becomes something very different from the man who began the journey. He still notices, he still thinks, he still sees what others miss. But now, when the moment arrives, absolutely, he doesn't stand outside it, he enters. And that may be the difference between a man who merely understands life and a man who actually lives it.